On December 11th at 7:30 at the Bernie Grant Centre in Tottenham, we will be live with a guest who is yet to be confirmed, but will be very special. Come along, meet us in person, enjoy the joy. It's just before Christmas. Have some eggnog, have a good time.
On the 11th of December, we've still got tickets on sale for the second ever Over the Top, Under the Radar live event, which I think we can call it a Christmas special because it's happening in December. You'll get to hear the podcast being recorded, you'll get to meet other listeners, and of course you'll get to hear from our very special guest. So there's still tickets left if you want to grab them. They start at £8. And yeah, it's going to be a fun night.
Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Karis Sofoko.
Every week, Karis and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
So, Karis, how you doing?
Do you know what? I'm cold.
You're cold. Let me see.
Just permanently cold, basically
England,
from now until
November.
Yeah, I think from now until about April, basically my hands and feet will be permanently cold because I'm tall, and so it's hard for the extremities to stay warm. How are you?
Well, I'm better than that. I was at Wortley Hall, which is
sounds like a
there's
stately
a connection
home
with the podcast. It's a kind of trade union owned facility, kind of in between Sheffield and Manchester. And following our event with Zara Sultana, who is kind of one of the key parliamentary lobbyists, is the wrong word, but I guess lobbyists or representatives for the FBU, the Fire Brigades Union, I was asked if I would go and do a talk at their political education week. That was fun.
That's nice. And I mean, I think the thing everyone wants to know is, did you wear the beanie? How are you wearing the beanie?
You know, I think I did wear the beanie. I have been
Nice.
wearing the beanie. Well, hang on. I think you put juju on my beanie. So
What are you talking about?
I lost my beanie yesterday. I lost it.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting that your first reaction is that I did juju on the beanie.
Yeah, from last week,
look, I think that's some West African prejudice there. I was very supportive of the beanie. I've been supportive of the hat. I was pro it. I said it was chic. I'm not out here trying to juju your beanie.
Okay, listeners, does anyone remember her saying it was chic? You call me a hipster.
Yes. Yeah, well, I said it was chic. I screenshotted it. I called you a hipster. These are all sort of, it's a form of compliment. And just for those who don't know, juju's kind of like dark magic, like casting a spell. It's big in West Africa, but I did not do it. I do not practice juju, for everyone listening. I'm very sad about the hat. Are you going to replace it?
Of course.
That's the real question.
I mean, here's the thing with me. That I get something that I like. That could be my Harlem top. It could be prawn korma. It could be my beanie hat. And then if I like it, then I just get more of it because I know I like it. So I got 3 Harlem tops, 2 red, 1 black. And
that explains okay, 2 red, that makes a lot of sense.
And I like my beanie. So I got a bunch more. Actually, they were coming before I'd even lost it.
Wait, have you branched out in the sort of color department?
Not particularly, no. I saw some that were like bright yellow, mustard. It's all dark
mustard,
and unadventurous.
I like a mustard on you.
Like my Harlem tops and my prawn korma. It's not adventurous. It just works.
I've never actually had prawn korma.
You know, my brother, he of the fancy snacks, I was at his house getting Indian food. This was like last year, the year before. He said, "What do you want?" And I asked for a king prawn korma. And he said, no. He was just like, "I'm not getting you that." Like, it was like, I know. It's just like, "I'm not getting you that."
Did you get a reason?
I'll get you a boot. Yeah, it's just like, that's not proper. I mean, it's true. It's not, well, it's just like, it's like that's kind of child's food. Like that is like you got your creamy almond thing. I mean, yeah, I don't know that he said all of that. It was
like, implied. It was implied. It was
like that is not proper Indian food. It was like one of those Italian waiters where they say, "Do you want in Italy?" Where they said, "Do you want red or white wine?" And you say, "White, please," and they say, "No." No, you can't.
I mean, it was a very Italian energy. I feel like Italians have a lot of somewhat arbitrary food rules that if you break, they look at you like you've just like harmed a puppy. Example, trying to have a cappuccino after like 11 a.m. They're just like, absolutely not, have an espresso, you animal.
Yeah, it's that thing of like, I cannot, in all good conscience, order you a korma. I cannot allow you.
It's just like, that's not, I won't enable this. I won't enable
be fair
this
on you
creamy
or me.
curry. Do it in the privacy of your own home on Deliveroo. They may not be authentic, but I bloody love a creamy curry. So I'm kind of with you on that. But I respect your brother's right to just police your life, you know?
Yeah.
I'm an elder sibling. We've got to be allowed to sort of keep you people in line. Okay, we've had a nice tweet. It wasn't about your beanie, weirdly. Libby Brooks on X got in touch and said, the latest episode from @OverUnderPod is just brilliant on the need to be curious about the US election result, the nonsense of demographics is destiny, and the pearl clutching commentariat. Oh, that was nice and snappy. The pearl clutching, I am very tired of. There's been a lot more of it the last week.
I know. Where do they get the pearls from? A big shout out to the people who signed up to Patreon this week. This week's new signups are Jamie, Andrew, Sheila, Emily, Kalkadan, I hope, Rob, Caroline, Claire, Andrea, and Eliza. Thanks so much to all of you.
We now have 332 paying Patreon supporters. Thank you so much to every one of you. It really helps us out if you support the podcast financially. We have a target of 400 Patreon supporters to reach by Christmas Day, the 25th of December. Honestly, everyone that supports us financially helps us to keep the podcast running long term, to make sure we can pay people and promote the podcast. If you're able to support us, the packages start at just £3 a month. So to keep the show running and access weekly bonus episodes, a newsletter, the exclusive Over Under WhatsApp community, where you can meet lots of other listeners and have chats, you just have to search Over the Top, Under the Radar on Patreon. And then in a few clicks, you are helping to keep the podcast running.
I don't know whether you're like this. When bad news on this scale comes along, I tend to just avoid the news then for a bit. I'm like, okay, you won.
Sensible, more sensible than me.
What is exhausting me at this moment, and what I think they're over the top on are, and I hinted at this last week, I alluded to this, the media and their predictions. What will Trump, what will happen in China? What will they do in some sense? First of all, you're not very good at predictions, which is fine, actually. You predicted that this election would be close. It wasn't particularly close. There was a prediction that Trump would be a goner. He's not a goner. So, it's fine because predictions are not your job. It's this notion that, they have some amazing insight that can tell the future. They're not clairvoyant. And the time when they're doing that, they could be describing what is actually happening. In terms of, I would like to see reporting on, and it's not that there's been none, but compared to the weight of the what will this and what will that, I'd like to see some reporting on where the money's going right now in terms of people following through, big business following through on the Trump victory. I'd like to see some reporting on how the left is reorganizing.
Yeah, I think it's a good over. Yeah, agree about the predictions. I think it comes from a good place in the sense of people, the idea is that journalists and pollsters have some extra insight, but I think you're right, it does create with the exception of the Conservative MPs who bet on the date of the general election once they knew what it was, it is a fairly pointless pastime. And I feel like over the last 10 days, it has felt a little bit like, when there are two BBC commentators vamping before a sports event starts and something's delayed it. And so they're like, did you know that this pitch was first laid in 1923? And they're like, yes, and 5,000 starlings could fit on it. And I think that is what it feels like you do get some insider information as a journalist, you do have some insight, but right now you don't know any more than any of us, and there's a bit of a lag now between Trump being elected and him actually being in office, and we could just spend that time speculating, or as you say, we could spend it doing investigations about what happened, thinking about how we're going to deal with Trump Mark II, which, oh Lord, I also think, Gary, if we're real, the only person who actually called the presidential election and really hasn't, been a big head about it is Mu Deng. Do you know about Mu Deng?
No.
Mu Deng's a hippo.
Okay. Oh, well then.
It's like a sort of baby pygmy hippo
Okay.
in Thailand.
Right.
She's super cute. I'm not really sure how she went viral on the internet, but it's like she's definitely like a 2024 thing. She's very cute and tiny. And basically, just before the election, they carved two different fruit, like kind of elaborate fruit displays with Trump and Harris's name. And then Mu Deng walked up to Trump. So she called the election. At the time, everyone was like, it's a stitch. They rigged it. And now, I mean, she seems to be the only prescient one. And
Okay.
she's not gassing the thing up. She's not going around being like, I know everything.
I haven't seen her on Fox.
And it does feel like somewhat like at this point, given Brexit, Trump Mark 1, Trump Mark 2, it's like you hit the mark about as often as the hippo. So maybe no.
Here's where I would slightly disagree with you, only slightly. Journalists should have insight, but actually, increasingly, they don't. They are as detached socially in their reporting and so on from Trump's base as they were from Corbyn's base, I would say. They should have insight. They should be able to discuss possible trajectories and so on, not predict the future, but describe things in a certain way. But increasingly, they're out of touch and they would rather be kind of declarative than exploratory. So they should have insight, but I don't hear a lot of that insight.
Do you think it's getting worse, or do you think it's always been like this?
I think it's getting worse. I think it's getting worse because the kind of oligarchic natures of journalism are getting worse. You used to be able to get in, say, Britain, used to be able to get into national journalism through your local paper. That was the way that you got in. Local paper, regional paper, national paper. Now it's much more of a graduate profession. A higher percentage of the commentariat went through Oxford and Cambridge and private school than Lords and so on. So there's that. And then I think that our politics has also become less predictable and more reliant on the kind of groups that they don't know. So I think these two things are going in different directions. I think that's as true on the left as on the right, although the right is pushing. Politics has been driven by more populist concerns at the same time that our journalists have become posher and more out of touch.
Okay, well, I've got two questions. One is, have you ever made any predictions that were, as a journalist, that were like completely right or completely wrong?
Yes. In 2003, I thought that the French and the rest of the Western opposition to the bombing of the Iraq War would just fold. And I think I wrote that. It's a different thing, right? Thinking it. We think all sorts of things about the future, but I think I did predict that they would fold. I just thought, well, ultimately you care more about your relationship with America than you give a shit about Iraq. So that's not what happened. That's the one that springs to mind. I'm sure there were more recent ones, but I did start to stop doing it for this very reason.
So yeah, okay, predictions. Maybe we could just ban them.
Yeah, I predict that they will be banned.
My under the radar is the Australian social media ban. Do you know about this?
I do not know about that.
So it's got cross-party consensus in Australia. I'm not going to do my Australian accent, but it's decent, if I do say so myself. Australians
so now I think you
disagree.
have to do it. You have to
and social media. Anyway, so the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, this has been floated. It's now going to be tabled in Parliament. Australia is going to ban social media for under 16s. I think it's an amazing idea. And the background is it's got cross-party support. The legislation's being introduced in the next week and it will come into force in the next year. It's just a really straightforward, good idea. Just for those who don't know, most social media platforms do have some sort of age restrictions or gating. You can't just like create a TikTok account or an Instagram account at birth. But what Australia wants to do is put the onus on social media companies to keep under 16s off their platform. It's a sign of how broken a lot of our political systems are that this is a standout piece of legislation. There is a private member's bill. A backbench MP has tabled some legislation in the UK, which is meant to stop young people from doom scrolling. So it's like a bit short of a ban, and I actually think it's crap. But the reason I love the Australian bill and think it's really brilliant is social media is really new. We have no idea the full impact of the technology on any of us, adults or children. But there are things that we can just see in a common sense way, like it's super addictive. We know that a lot of these apps have been engineered to give us constant dopamine hits. We restrict things to children all the time. Like, children aren't allowed to work in coal mines in the UK or in many countries, or indeed work at all. And I think for the generation who have had unfettered access to social media, of which I'm like a little bit too old to be part of, I did get on social media probably as a teenager. I got a phone as a teenager, but it wasn't a smartphone. We've already done a whole generation harm. The evidence we have that leaks from tech companies, so like their research into the harm of their products, is that platforms like Instagram have a negative effect on people's mental health, make them more anxious, impact their self-esteem. And then the other issue is that young people are so tech savvy that often their parents have no idea what they're accessing online. So this is one for me that I think it's not that complicated or nuanced. Ban it. We don't know what it's doing to people. The things we do know are not good. No one under 16 should be on social media platforms. So I like it. It's under the radar. We need to do it here. Yeah, ban it, Gary. Ban it.
So, I agree with you about the negative effects of social media. And I have an 11-year-old. She doesn't have a phone. Most of her mates have a phone. It's very difficult to police. My question is, can you ban it? Like, is the ban, of course you can ban it. Will the ban be effective?
We're only going to know if the ban is effective if we try it. But I would say it is the most effective option. The core of why I think banning it is essential is we can't trust tech companies to produce a safe product. They have no incentive to do so, and they are pretty demonstrably bad actors. So the UK equivalent, which is aimed at making social media less bad, is like going to a tobacco company being like, can you make fags like a bit more healthy and a bit less addictive? Or probably more accurately, going to a pharmaceutical company being like, could you price these drugs fairly for us? So it's like, there isn't a clear way that we can ameliorate the harm. The harm itself is like pretty bad. You know, at its worst, you have people like Brianna Guy's mother, whose daughter was killed, like, by other teenagers who had been looking things up online that, if their parents had been aware of what they were looking, probably would have kicked them into gear. Brianna's mum herself had a trans daughter who she didn't know was accessing online materials about self-harm, about eating disorders. Like, the stakes are too high for us to mess about. And even if the ban isn't completely enforceable and some young people are still accessing social media, I think it's still a better and safer place to be than the one we are in now. It's hard to overestimate or like over egg the pudding on quite how dramatic the impact of social media is on all of our brains and behavior. And it just feels so strange to me that something that's so new and so untested would be happy to just put into the hands of some of the most vulnerable people in the world. I think there's a world in which in 20 or 30 years' time, social media is massively restricted for everyone. My joke with friends is that, like, this may be our equivalent of cigarettes. And like in 20 years' time, our kids and nieces and nephews will be like, what, you just had that phone in your hand all day? You slept with it near your head? You were just like scrolling on Twitter for several hours a day, even though it was run by Elon Musk. Like, I don't think it's clear social media is good for adults. Given the harms to children are pretty significant, I think a ban is the safest option. And also, technology companies have these huge lobbying arms. Some would argue if they put like half the resource that they put into lobbying into making their products safe, then we wouldn't need to be banning platforms. But these companies have spent billions of dollars to schmooze politicians. And so anything short of a ban, I think, gives them a chance to help to write the rules. And I'm really not a Luddite. I love technology. There are many magical and beautiful things about it, but the bad stuff is pretty bad. And it's almost like we've forgotten that we can just tell these companies no.
So my under is Mozambique. Recently, there have been riots, there have been demonstrations, there have been shootings, deaths, and here's why. Last month there were elections. The ruling Frelimo party, which has run Mozambique since its independence in 75, so nearly 50 years, they say they got 70% of the vote. But there are widespread allegations of irregularity, vote stuffing, messing about with tabulations. Most people think they probably would have won by not that much. So the opposition party, which is called Podemos, the Optimistic Party for the Development of Mozambique, also means Yes We Can, which is made up of disaffected Frelimo members. They put up a candidate for president. Their candidate is disqualified. There's another populist called Venancio Mondlane. He's got no party. So this centre-left opposition to Frelimo and this populist evangelical candidate, they decide to support him. Once you get the sense of the vote stuffing and the ballot counting, there are protests. Podemos's lawyer, Elvino Diaz, says he's got the receipts. So they shoot him, and they shoot a leading member of Podemos. 2 people killed. That sparks a massive 4-phase general strike that's led by Mondlane. Hundreds of thousands of people across the country gather, they protest. Thing about Mondlane, however, is that while he's attached himself for convenience to this centre-left kind of liberal socialist party, he's actually quite Trumpy. He's had connections with Europe's far right. He's praised Bolsonaro. He is not a reliable element. But at this stage, I think what's happening is all the opposition to Frelimo, which is considerable, even if it's not a majority, is gathering around him and Podemos.
I hadn't heard any of that, and I do pay attention to headlines in African countries, so it's definitely flown very much under my radar. I'm not sure if it has other listeners. Yeah, I think you make an interesting point about this challenge of party of independence that then becomes the party of government, how and whether it's possible for there to be easy transitions of power. I think interestingly, it's not even just an African challenge. If you take a long enough view at American history, that is the Democratic Party, right? It was the party of quote unquote liberation from the British, George Washington's party. And it takes decades in the 1800s for other political parties to emerge. And initially, this is where I'm becoming a history nerd, but I promise listeners it will be a 10-second history lesson. Initially, parties that sprung up like the Whigs or the Know Nothings, like the Whigs are basically, we're not the Dems. And then, you get the Know Nothings, you get the Republican Party, you get the Civil War. Won't try and do it justice on this podcast. But I think there's a similarity, right? Of you need all of this cohesion and unity to win independence from a colonial power. And a lot of the things it takes to be a successful liberation movement set you up really badly to be like a pluralist, democratic, the ANC is a good example because the ANC had to do a lot of things in secret and had a military wing. And then you're asking the exact same people to suddenly be really good parliamentarians. I also think increasingly, because we are in this connected world and because this trend of strong men who don't care a lot about democracy, but have a lot of simple answers to all of your questions are springing up everywhere. It just feels like we should be paying attention to every single one of them so that we can learn how to beat them. So yeah, it's sort of a scary one though. What do you think is going to happen?
I have no idea. I wouldn't deign to predict.
No prediction.
But I don't know Mozambique well enough. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Mondlane is that him and Podemos have found some place to be together, I think, because they don't share the same politics, broadly speaking, but they didn't have a candidate and he didn't have a party. But I think that you get into this place that you kind of described where it's like, we're not Frelimo, and that not being Frelimo, not being part of the ruling party, not being part of something that growing numbers of people, although I don't necessarily think a majority.
I guess it's a case of like unlikely bedfellows.
Yeah.
It's also just some like really telling and depressing thing about people in power, right? The idea that they could have won the election with a, 52, 53%, but they were like, nah, we want it bigger than that.
I mean, there is a tested adage that in the wake of every revolution, the very people who demand democracy then become the dictators. And there is some evidence that, although this is 50 years, and they have been problematic, and winning elections for 50 years. But as you say, the idea is a bit like Labour's ruling centre, which will only tolerate the left so long as there's no chance of the left winning. But as soon as Corbyn comes along and it's like, oh, so that's real, then this can never happen again. So just the idea that they might lose is enough.
My over the top for the week is a word. It's actually a word I quite like, but I think we have to lay it down. My over the top for the week is woke.
Whoa.
Stay woke. What does woke mean to you, Gary?
Woke to me is like political correctness. It's become to mean whatever you want it to mean so long as you don't like it. It's pejorative, it's a slur, and it's also been leveraged to the hilt. There's a law in Florida banning woke in education. There was something that was passed in the House of Representatives, and it means diversity and and anti-racism.
Yeah, well, so I think part of the annoying thing and the reason I'm really over the word is that like that actually isn't what woke means, and it's one of those interesting words where because it's sort of slang, sort of pop culture-y, it's hard to be exactly sure who came up with it or where it first appeared, but you can go back to Marcus Garvey speeches where he's sort of appealing to the crowd to like wake up. The sort of first official reference to woke is a New York Times op-ed, which has this amazing headline. If you're woke, you dig it, from 1962 in the New York Times, which was actually a novelist writing about white beatniks appropriating the word woke. The reason I like the word, or I used to like the word, is that it's about consciousness, right? It hits on something that I think is important for left-wing politics or like Marxist politics, which is about seeing things that you then can't unsee. So seeing systems and structures that aren't right and wanting a different world. And that incantation, stay woke, which has been in a couple of songs, is like, don't switch that bit of your brain off, right? Stay aware, stay conscious, see the world as it really is, as opposed to like how powerful people are telling you it works or it can be. But then, yeah, the bad thing, as you've hit on, is it's now used as a stick to be, I mean, not even just lefties, like just anyone the right doesn't like. When I heard that Kamala Harris lost the American presidential election because she was too woke, or Democrats were too woke, I just felt like we'd hit peak woke and the word no longer meant anything. And like, let's just be really clear about this. Kamala Harris didn't run as woke. She didn't talk about her identity as a Black woman, or even really as a woman. It's factually inaccurate that Democrats ran as this woke party who were like super left and anti-capitalist. But also, within our own movement, people are being told it's your fault. It's your fault, Black people, gay people, people who like are perceived as different or other. We pandered too much to you and now we've lost the election, which is hot, salty garbage and isn't based on anything. But also, I think it's one of those things where there's a lie contained within it. This year, the celebrity star of the Boots Christmas ad is Adjoa Ando, who is in Bridgerton. She plays Lady Danbury. And in this advert, she is playing Mrs. Claus, spoiler alert for an advert, while Santa, presumably her husband, is sleeping. Her and the elves, some of whom are visibly queer, shock horror, are pulling together all the presents for Santa's sleigh. And at the end of the ad, Santa wakes up and it's like, oh, ready to go. Darren Grimes, who I don't recommend that you follow on social media or indeed listen to, tweeted some sort of tirade of like, this is woke nonsense. Why is the white man useless and asleep? Why are they talking about they, them? And like, the thing I hate most about woke and the word woke and the phrase woke is it conceals this lie, which is that we on the left are sensitive and overly policing of others' language and annoying cultural Marxist, horrible people pushing dangerous ideas. Whereas actually the sensitive snowflakes, the people who can't tolerate culture unless it fits into a narrow box, are people on the right. We have made some progress on social issues. People who have been harassed just for who they are or how they look or how they present are experiencing like a modicum amount of more representation and visibility and rights. And as a result, they and like we on the left are being harassed and bullied.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we actually have to really not even dignify it as an insult. When people used to talk about political correctness to me, I used to say, so I don't understand what that means. What do you mean? And I just wouldn't entertain the word. Even the notion that she ran as well because she didn't run as well. What are you talking? What? Just tell us what you mean. What are the policies or what are the things that she said? I'm not going to deal with you on whether she, not you personally, but on whether she was woke or not, because I don't know what that means. Chances are you can't define it. And if you mean she was too pro-black, show me where. Show me how. Show me where. Show me how. And tell me what the issue is. Politically correct policing, that's what they used to talk about. And that meant not stopping and searching so many black boys. Just tell me what you actually are talking about and don't hide behind the word.
I think we just got to kill it now. Can't say woke anymore. And yeah, we need to move on. It's a shame. It's a good word.
I mean, I was kind of over it like last year or the year. But I mean, as soon as it started being
it's quite a hipster thing to say, isn't it? You were over it before everyone else. A little bit cooler than me. Oh, you're overwoke. I was overwoke last year. Just a little bit ahead of the curve. No, it's okay. You're a hipster. You got your beanie. You drink oat milk.
I have no words.
And you are into stuff before other people are into it because you're cool. That's all right, Gary.
This is where the juju starts. Thank you for listening to Over the Top and Under the Radar. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. We're up for an award next week. Best Ensemble Award. Keep everything crossed for us.
Yeah, next week we are going to the Audio Production Awards. Excitingly, the Unedited team, which is the production company that makes Over the Top Under the Radar, is up for 2 awards. So Gary and I are up for Best Ensemble Cast, and our production company Unedited is up for Production Company of the Year. You can't vote, but please keep your fingers crossed for us and we'll let you know what the awards are like. If you do want to support the show, you can find us by searching Over the Top Under the Radar on the Patreon website. Thank you to everyone who does support us, and if you can afford to give some money to keep the show running, please do.
You can sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
And you can connect with us on social media. We have the same handle everywhere at over_under_pod_.